to this special PowerPoint presentation on CA 2.6, which is Strategic Business Analysis course, and we shall specifically look at the examination answering techniques. And in this presentation, we shall consider what you candidates or the candidates that wrote March 2022, then June 2022, September 2022, December 2022, and March 2023, and we shall follow them in order. This discussion will involve the following terms of reference. A, the general competencies that the students are expected to demonstrate from the approved syllabus. B, common mistakes exhibited by the candidates in the examinations as provided by the Chief Examiner's reports, that is March 2022 to March 2023. And C, we shall provide practical examination questions per topic in a particular course. And in this case, CA 2.6, and how candidates should approach these questions in the examination. And lastly, in D, interpretation of the syllabus command words of each learning outcome which we have identified. Now we shall look at the general competency required by students as our TORA. The students should have the following competences in their study and in their final examinations. 1, provide reasonable advice on the formulation of business strategies. In this case, the student should be able to explain the purpose and the objectives of strategic choice. The students should also be able to evaluate and show the relationship between good governance and the strategy, and also evaluate the ethical impact of strategic decisions. The second one is to provide reasonable advice on the choice of business strategy. And in this case, we expect the students should be able to evaluate strategic analysis techniques, evaluate strategic choice, and evaluate the ethical impact of certain strategies that we make. And number 3, we expect students to provide reasonable advice on the implementation of business strategies. In this case, the students are expected to evaluate strategic implementation plans, evaluate the ethical impact of strategic decisions, and lastly, in this case, assess strategies within appropriate governance and as risk framework. Then number 4, competence, we require that the student assess strategy within appropriate governance and risky framework. And in this case, we'll expect the students to evaluate the relationship between good governance and strategy, evaluate suitable risk monitoring and management processes. And lastly, in this competence, we expect the student to evaluate the ethical impact of strategic decisions. The 5th competence that we request of the student is to provide reasonable advice on ethical framework, choices, and the impact of strategic decisions. And in this case, we expect the students to evaluate the ethical impact of strategic decisions taken. Number 7, general competencies that are required, that we expect the students to evaluate suitable risk monitoring and management processes, evaluate the ethical impact of strategic decisions. 8, undertake business evaluations. And 9, conduct financial analysis to support the development of financial strategy. And the 10th competence that is required is understand the ethical framework, choice, and impact of strategic decisions. Now we are going to the second part, which is terms of reference B, that is the common mistakes that students make in the examinations. One is not understanding the questions in full. Two, misleading questions or their parts. Three, answering only parts of the technique, the questions. Inability to explain the relationship between concepts. And 4 or 5, inability to explain how a concept can be used in practical, like for business development. Inability to apply models to solving problems. Inability to discuss concepts. Also, failure to provide solutions to managerial or business problems, challenges, or dilemmas. Solutions provided failing to address the issue presented. The next one is the inability to carry out calculations. Confusion of some certain concept for others due to poor understanding of the same. Diagrams are not labeled correctly, and poor handwriting, spellings, and grammar, and expect the markers to know what they have written. We now specifically turn to the common mistakes that we exhibited by candidates in examinations March 2022 to March 2023. And in this case, we shall start first of all with the compulsory questions, which is the biggest question that students have to answer, and it carries 40 marks. And in my presentation here, we shall look at all the 4 papers that were written as far as question 1 is concerned. Then we shall also now turn to the other section where we will only look at 1 paper and focus at how we can answer the questions. And that will be done for March 2023. And now I go to the questions, question 1, and we shall start with the general understanding of this question, that this is a compulsory question. Every student must answer, and that's why the risk is very high if students don't do very well. This has always been a case study based on compulsory question to be attempted by all candidates. In all 4 papers that have been examined, it has always had the 3 to 4 sub-questions with a total marks of 40. Some sub-questions were done very well, but most candidates, however, had scored very, very poorly. The common mistake made by candidates are hereby discussed for each session paper. We shall start with March 2022 as it was presented. And in this case, this question that came in this session had 5 parts. There was A, B, C, D, and E. Both part A and the part B were well done, and therefore I will not discuss, but I will discuss the common mistakes that were made in the other 3 parts. And in C, which is part C, few candidates got the answer right as they failed to state how the application of information systems can support the company's strategies. As they did not understand it at all, candidates must read the questions carefully to answer it properly. Most of them merely used the common knowledge and thus lost their marks. In part D, this part required the candidates to draw the e-market value chain and also compare it with the traditional value chain. But most candidates could not understand the e-market value chain and just replicated the original value chain, which they know so well. And many candidates didn't even know what the e-market value chain was at all. In part E, in this paper, required the candidates to calculate earnings per share and dividend cover, and then analyze the results to assess the position of the company. Only very few candidates who could remember the formula got the answer correct. We move over to June 2022 and question 1. The general performance on this question was poor, as 44 out of the 198 candidates that attempted the question achieved a pass. That is a score of at least 20 marks out of 40, representing a pass rate on this question of 22.2%. This question had the 4 sub-parts, A, B, C, and D. And part A was well done by majority of the candidates, but not in the other 3 parts whose mistakes will be discussed below. Part B asked candidates to do with the help of a diagram. Discuss the external environment of Zoom tracking company influenced a company's strategic decision. Many of the candidates got this answer wrong as a result of the above mistake. In part C, required the candidates to explain the strategic significance of the alliance between Singh Transport Company and Zambia Haulage Company. Again, very few candidates got this answer wrong, as they did not even understand what strategic alliance was. Candidates must read the question carefully to answer it properly. Most of them merely used the common knowledge and thus lost the marks. And in part D, which asked the candidates to discuss 5 benefits of strategic alliance, many candidates didn't even know what this was all about. Then we turn to the same question, question 1, in September 2022. The following were the mistakes observed on the question. 1, almost all candidates on all parts of the question, they answered all the parts of the question. However, some candidates did not understand what was expected from them to demonstrate. While as some candidates answered all parts of the questions well, others were giving general knowledge of centralization and decentralization. The second mistake on this paper and question, the presentation of the answers was relatively poor by most candidates, as they failed to demonstrate an analytical answer in their presentation as expected by the examiners. And the third one was that some candidates were unable to answer to the specific demands by the examiners, as their solutions were of general nature than being specific. And the fourth errors that were made on this question, it was clear that a good number of candidates lacked capacity to answer the question convincingly. Then we turn to the same question, question 1 of December 2022. The general performance on this question was poor. 74 out of the 212 candidates that attempted the question achieved a pass. That is a score of at least 20 out of 40, representing a pass rate on this question of 35%. This question had 3 subparts, A, B, and C, and both A and B were correctly answered, except for part C, which is discussed below. Part C requested candidates to calculate financial ratios from the given data and explain to stakeholders the implication, that is ratio analysis. First point was that most candidates failed to calculate the ratios, that is interest cover, cash flow ratio, and gearing. The second thing was that at this level, students should have taken this part of the question with interest, but the candidates were just mixing the figures as if they are not accounting students. And lastly, on this part, most of them merely used common knowledge and thus lost marks. We now turn to the same question, question 1 of March 2023. And the general performance on this question was also poor, as 28 out of 111 candidates that attempted the question achieved a pass mark, which is, of course, between 20 and 40 marks, and representing a pass rate of only 25%. The question, unlike questions discussed in the area papers, had only 2 parts, that is A and B. Part A, SWOT analysis and the Porter's 5 forces model. Less than half of the candidates got these models correctly. Most of them, instead of gave a Porter's value chain analysis model and a Pestel analysis model. On the B part, the answers for this section B was closely tied to A above. Hence, those who got a wrong answer in A also got this answer wrong. Now, after having discussed all the papers of the question 1, we will now turn to optional questions and the mistakes that were observed in the June 2022. I'll read the question, then I'll give the views thereafter. Part A of question 3, which had A and B, required the candidates to state and comment on what would be involved in the steps that are to be taken in strategic analysis of their company. And what was observed was that only a few candidates gave the correct answer to the part. A number of them did not even follow the prescribed solutions in the manner it was presented, but instead followed the generic mode from strategic formulation to implementation and evaluation. And in part B, the candidates were required to describe the 3 tests that can be used to evaluate the merits of one strategy over another and to gauge how good a strategy was. It was observed that most candidates did not respond well to the questions, as they wrongly thought they were suitability, feasibility, acceptability. The performance on this part was very, very poor. We will now turn to question 5 of the same June 2022, we shall discuss only part B, as part A was well answered. In this case, the candidates were required to explain how they knew companies can assess how they were using their resources. The majority of the candidates failed to give the correct answer. We will now turn to September 2022 optional questions. And there we had 3 questions, question 2, question 3, and question 5 that were poorly answered. And these are the ones that I will discuss. Question 2 of September 2022 and section B, we found that part A and B were well done, but part C, there were mistakes. And in part C, candidates were asked to calculate the asset turnover, gross profit margin, receivable collection period, inventory days, and the payable payment period. And we observed that the majority of the candidates did not understand the question. And the simple concepts used, like the marketing mix, even worse was their failure to perform the simple calculations. Hence, over 3/4 of them failed this question. A strange thing indeed for accounting students. And in question 3 of the same paper, the other 2 parts were done well, but part C wasn't well done, in where the candidates were asked to calculate the asset turnover, return on investment, return on equity, net income, and return on sales. These future accountants could not even do the simple calculations, which are going to be a staple of their work when they are in the industry. Question 5. In this case, we will discuss only part B, as part A was well done. And it will require the candidates to discuss the practical financial risks that affect business following Zambia's recently held presidential and general elections on 12 August 2021. The majority of the candidates failed to give these answers correctly. We now turn to December 2022 on section B, which are optional questions. And in this case, in this paper, only question 4 and 5 were not done very well. And in question 4 of December 22, part B, which was poorly done, asked the candidates to use the diagram to describe the components of the BCG matrix. Most of the candidates lost marks on this part of the questions. Many of them could not come up with a clearly labeled BCG matrix diagram, therefore could not describe the elements which were therein. Part C of the same question 4 required the candidates to advise strategic planners cautions to be taken when using the BCG matrix. And from the observations, most of the candidates could not give correct answers on this part of the questionnaire. Candidates must understand the importance of these models in strategic planning decision making. In the same paper, we'll also observe in question 5, particularly part B, which required the candidates to describe some factors sponsors could look for when selecting alliance partners for investment part. This was poorly answered. Most of the candidates were using common knowledge to attempt and thereby lost marks. And part C of the same question 5 of December 2022, this part had 2 sub-questions within that part, which involved calculations of ratio to evaluate growth in earnings, return on investment capital, and required sales from the figure given, and also to explain in the meaning of the answers. The majority of the candidates failed to give the correct answer. This shows lack of seriousness in students during accounts, because this part of the question should have been an easy for them. We now turn to the actual question mistakes in the March 2023. And in this case, we particularly looked at question 4 and question 5. This question was poorly answered. Most candidates did not understand the questions for both part A and part B. The candidates did not even understand the strategic choice focus of this course. They needed to have basic knowledge of strategic tools. And in question 5, the general performance on the question was very poor. 17 out of the 65 candidates that attempted the questions managed to obtain at least 10 marks out of the 20 that were available. A pass rate of 26% was recorded. The highest score was 18 out of 20 marks, while the lowest was 1. This question was poorly answered on all the aspects, A and B. Most candidates did not understand what was expected of them in the questions. We now turn to terms of reference number C, in which we were to provide practical examination questions. And on the practical examination questions per topic in 2.6, this section will discuss optional types of questions on each of the 7 syllabus topics. Discussion on how the candidates are expected to approach each of these questions of the examinations. For the illustration of how candidates will apply themselves to how they approach each of the questions in the examinations, the March 2023 paper for this course shall be used in doing so that candidates are reminded also of the following things before we go in details. 1, go into the exam room early and well prepared both mentally and physically. Avoid fatigue, stress, and worries, tensions, fear, etc. before and during the examination. Dress comfortably in terms of clothing and shoes. Sit comfortably and in an strained posture. Bring enough and appropriate pens, pencils, erasers, ruler, calculator, and other things. Be focused on the task at hand to correctly answer questions in a limited and allocated time. Read the instructions very carefully and thoroughly to understand the question. Firstly, read all the questions on the paper as quickly as possible. Then read all the questions slowly while referring to the instructions given. Understand what the question really requires. If in doubt, ask the invigilator to clarify if he or she is able to do so. Do not try to second guess the question. Decide which question to answer based on their contents, your understanding, and your capabilities. Mark out accordingly. Use the marks allocated to each question and parts to determine roughly how much time to spend on each. The more the marks, the more the time and effort that are required. Answer the compulsory questions first, no matter how difficult it may be, since it always has the biggest marks allocated to it. Answer the questions depending on level of easiness, content, or preference. Now we shall look at questions taken from CA 2.6 paper, section B of March 2023 for practical answering techniques. We will start with question 2 of March 2023, which was done. And in this case, question 2 reads, or read, because since you've done it, a central issue in strategic management is why some firms perform better than others. One answer to this question is the extent to which strategic leadership is exercised in the firm. It can also be argued that assembling a capable management team is a cornerstone of the organization. However, the most important consideration is to fill managerial slots with smart people who are clear thinkers, good at figuring out what needs to be done, and the skill in making it happen and delivering the results. This kind of influence is often referred to as strategic leadership. At this core, the essence of power, authority, and politics in leadership is a matter of influence. That is, motivation members of the organization to achieve the goals of the organization and get desired result. Charles Hill and Gareth Jones, in their book, Strategic Management, suggest that there are 6 characteristics of effective strategic leaders in an organization. And in this question, 3 parts were required. The first part was discuss any 4 characteristics of effective strategic leadership in an organization, as postulated by Charles Hill and Gareth Jones. And it was allocated 12 marks. And it must be understood this question came from implementation of business strategy. B, discuss 3 main strategic management elements, and that carried 6 marks. And as you may know, this was formulation of business strategy. In question 6, C, discuss the fundamental questions which needs answers at the corporate level strategy in an organization. And this only carried 2 marks, and it was from formulation of business strategy. Now, when it comes to answering this question, A, brief discussion, any 4 characteristics were required, with each characteristic attracting 3 marks. Any 3 facts on each characteristic were to attract marks. And in the B section, knowledge of the 2 facts on each strategic management element for 3 candidates were to receive all 6 marks. And C, any 2 questions request were given 4 marks. That's why it only had 2 marks. Now, from the marker's point of view, there's what I'm calling marker's comment. The general performance in this question was excellent. 80 of the 92 candidates that attempted the question managed to obtain at least 10 marks out of the 20 marks. A pass rate of 87% was recorded. The highest score was 17 out of 20, while the lowest was 2. This question was in 3 parts, A, B, C, as Area said, with the following comments from the marker. In A, characteristics of an effective leader were correctly given by the candidates. In B, some candidates gave correct strategic management element while others failed to. And in C, this section of the question at the strategic level of company was correctly given by majority of the candidates. We move over to question 3 of March 2023, and the question read, Matoka Investment Limited is a Kitwe-based company dealing in petroleum and lubricant products with outlets in Lusaka, Mansa, Solwezi, and Joma. It has a very innovative management with its founder, Mr. Geoffrey Matoka, as its chief executive chairman. Him and his managers have believed in developing strategies that should guide how an organization conducts its business and how it will achieve its target objectives. According to the requirements, which were 3, A, state 5 benefits that Matoka Investment Limited will accrue from the strategic management of its company, and it carried about 10 marks. And that is from formulation of business strategy. And in B, indicate any 5 participants that will participate in the strategic management of this company. That carried 5 marks. And C, list any 5 features that characterize the strategic management of a company. And that carried only 5 marks. And all of them are from formulation of business strategy. A, answering this question, it was expected that stating a 1-line explanation for each of the 5 benefits was awarded 2 marks each, and 10 marks in total for the 5 items requested. In B, listing of any 5 of the participants requested attracted only 1 mark for each mark. That's why it added to 5 marks. And in C, this part was to be answered like in B, in line form, in list form, and it attracted also 5 marks. And this is what the marker made a comment. The general performance on this question was very good. 77 of the 100 candidates that attempted the question managed to obtain at least 10 out of the 20 marks that were available. And in this case, on this question, a pass rate of 77 was recorded. The highest score was 20 out of 20, while the lowest was nothing or 0. This question was in 3 parts, of course, as I earlier said, A, B, and C. The performance was very good with all the 3 parts, and well done. The layouts of answers were well done by most candidates. Congratulations. Question 4. And in question 4, this is how the question went. Further digitalization of core newspaper and magazine business was clearly important and would require substantial funding. There were also opportunities for the launch of new magazine titles in the country. Ntari Frederick, chairman and the CEO for the Aka Tilimu publishers, had 27.5 million approved by the board to invest in the new opportunities. With over 1,500 direct employees and 1,000 agents, Frederick was considering acquisition opportunities, looking at buying of local media houses and television stations in the neighboring countries like DRC and Zimbabwe. He was also attracted by the possibility of buying undervalued assets in the old media and turning them around in the style of a private equity investor. In this case, what was required, there were 2. Use the appropriate strategic tool to analyze the strategic options available for Aka Tilimu publishers, and this carried about 14 marks. In the B, diversification can be chosen for a variety of reasons, some more valued creating than others. Explain 3 potential value-creating reasons for diversification, and this carried 6 marks. And this, all of the 2 sections came from the choice of business strategy. Answering the question, this is what was required of each candidate who attempted. A, this part was better done by exploring the strategic tool with a diagram and describing the process. And in B, candidates were supposed to demonstrate their knowledge by explaining 2 ideas on any one potential value-creating reason for diversification. This question could not have been a problem had the candidates understood their study materials. And from the marker's point of view, the general performance on this question was poor, as 24 of the 74 candidates that attempted the question managed to obtain at least 10 out of the 20 marks. A pass rate of 32% was recorded, the highest being 20 out of 20, while the lowest being 0. So the questions was poorly answered. Most candidates did not understand the question for both part A and part B. So the candidates did not understand the strategic tools and strategic choice focus of this course. They needed to have basic knowledge of strategic tools. We now move to question 5 of March 2023. And this is how the question read. Mr. Mobita Akakandelwa has just been recruited by the Industrial Development Company, IDC, as Managing Director for newly created insurance company that will deal in both general and life for all local and foreign trucks traversing on Zambia roads. Mr. Akakandelwa and his staff in the new company have been requested to ensure that compensation of the high number of claims due to road accident and operations of the firm should be efficiently managed to the satisfaction of the stakeholders. Managing of an effective organization is about producing results that meet the objectives of that organization. And the requirements were about 3. The first one, which is A, the assessment of results requires that there be criteria, such as goals or objectives, and that these be set ahead of time. There are 5 suggested categories of criteria for assessing organizations' results. Explain any 4 of these categories. And this came from implementation of business strategy, and that part carried 12 marks. In the B section, Mr. Kakanderwa will need to have some form of power. State any 4 bases of power that he is likely to use to run the company. And that carried only 4 marks. It comes from ethical framework, choice, and impact of strategic decisions. And the last one was C, in which it was requested in finding out how the company is performing, he will use 4 general groups of ratios. Point out these groups of ratios. And that carried 4 marks. And that is from risk management. Now, in answering this question, in A, this was a simple question attracting 3 marks that consisted of 3 facts in each of the 4 categories put forward by the candidates, thereby giving the 12 marks. As for B, there are 5 bases of power which we are aware of. All the candidates needed to do is to state only 4 of them and get the 4 marks allocated, each mark for one of them. And in C, the candidates were requested to show groups of 4 ratios, namely profitability, liquidity, leverage, and activity ratios. And because they were just asked to point out, 1 mark was sufficient for each one of the 4 requested. And from the marker's point of view, the general performance on this question was poor, as only 17 of the 65 candidates that attempted the question managed to obtain at least 10 out of the 20 marks that were given. And in this case, a pass rate of 26% was recorded. The highest score was 18 out of 20, while the lowest was only 1. This question was poorly answered on all aspects, A and B. Most candidates did not understand what is expected of them in questions. That's why initially I said that the candidates must understand what is being asked out of them. Looking at what they had gone through, they had been prepared. We will now go to the last terms of reference, which is the interpretation of the syllabus command words of each learning outcome identified. In our discussion here, I'll point out what are the syllabus topics and the weighting as well as the learning outcome. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 syllabus topics expected to be taught and be known by the students. The first one is provide reasoned advice on the formulation of business strategy, which carries 20 marks or 20%. And you have 3 learning outcomes, 1, 2, 3, which we will look at later. Then there's governance, which is 10% weight. Risk management, 10%. Provide reasonable advice on the choice of business strategy, 20%. Provide reasonable advice on the implementation of business strategy, 20%. Ethical framework, choice, and impact of strategic decision is also 20 marks. Now, what are the learning objectives that are expected out of all these that we have discussed? We have about 7. LO1 Explain the purpose and the objective of the strategic choice. 2, evaluate the relationship between good governance and strategy. 3, evaluate suitable risk monitoring and management processes. 4, evaluate strategic analysis techniques. 5, evaluate strategic choice. And 6, evaluate strategic implementation plans. And 7, evaluate the ethical impact of the strategic decision. Now, in coming up with the command words, we have to interpret, looking at the syllabus and looking at the learning outcomes that are required, as was stipulated in the initial table that I gave you. And we shall start with the first one, where we said, provide reasonable advice on the formulation of business strategy. And it's expected out of that you should bring out 1, 2, or 3 outcomes. And therefore, the candidates are being requested to, as for the first one, looking at the syllabus item, explain the purpose and the objectives of the strategic choice on the formulation of business strategy in an organization. In this case, we need each candidate to explain the purpose and objective. The second one goes to number 2, learning outcome number 2. Out of this syllabus, what is expected of each student? It is to evaluate the relationship between good governance and the formulation of business strategy. And for the third learning outcome, it also goes to evaluate. Probably we need you to explain, because there are 2 words in that particular syllabus as far as items are concerned. One is to explain what is it that you know. The other 2, we will request you to evaluate, having known how does it affect the business. That's why we've used the word evaluate. As for governance, which is the second item in the syllabus, it has 2 learning outcomes, 2 and 7. And in this case, the candidates need to evaluate on both of the 2 learning outcomes. The role and relationship between governance and the organization strategy. And secondly, evaluate the ethical impact of strategic decision vis-a-vis corporate governance. So in this case, the command word which is important as far as governance is concerned is to ensure you bring out what are the critical issues that affects the running of the of the organization. The third item is risk management on the syllabus. And in that case, you have the learning outcomes, which are 3 and 7. And how do these command words come out? Both of them are to evaluate. So at this particular stage in strategic analysis, you have the ideas, you have the knowledge. How do you apply the knowledge to solve and resolve the problems that are in this particular institution or organization? So you have to evaluate. So that's a very serious command word and of a very high level at this particular time. Then the fourth one is provide reasonable advice on the choice of business strategy. And the institution, ZIC, would like you to bring out 4 learning outcomes. That is 4, 3, and 7. And in this case, all of them are evaluation. From what you know and what you've learned and what you've experienced, how do we resolve these questions? And that's why we've said evaluate the provision of reasoned advice on strategic analysis techniques. And this is what we had pointed out, that most of candidates and students do not understand the tools that are required for you to make an analysis. The second one, which is also evaluate the provision of reasonable advice on strategic choice of business strategy. And the third one, also evaluate the provision of reasoned advice on the ethical impact of strategic decision on choices of business strategy. And even from the presentation that had been given on the mistakes, if only the candidates and the students have done their homework by looking through and applying to various situations, that's why we give you situational questions, so that you are able to apply with what you know to how the problems can be solved by that issue that we've given you at hand as examiners. Then we have provide reasonable advice on the implementation of business strategy. And here there are two learning outcomes, 6 and 7, which Area pointed out. And even these are evaluations. So you can see how important evaluation is in your syllabus of 2.6. And for this one, we expect you to evaluate the provision of reasoned advice on strategic implementation of business plans. And 2, evaluate the provisions of reasonable advice on the ethical impact of strategic decision on the implementation of business strategy. And the very last one is ethical framework, choice and impact of strategic decisions. And it has only one learning objective, which is number 7. Even this one is the evaluation. Evaluate the ethical framework and choice, as well as the impact of strategic decision made by management of the organization. Dear candidates and students, including the tutors of these students, you can see that of all in the major of the syllabus is about evaluation. Explaining, which is a lower level, cognitive level, is very, very small. We expect, as you heard from the presentation, the mistake is that our students, they either take it raw and they cannot tell the difference in the scenario situation they are given. So in this case, the major part of our assessment is based on evaluation. How much do you understand what you learned? How much do you apply what you have learned? And how much do you use the tools that have been given to you to resolve the issues? Strategic business analysis is about knowing where you're going, where the organization is going, and how it resolves their problem, because we are in a world of competition. Thank you very much for listening. I'm grateful that you paid your ear to my presentation. Once again, I'm Alisala Mulambia.